I've just been having a lovely time looking at your photos of the houses that you guys built in the 70s.
Ah,
I was just doing a bit of research. So it would be really lovely to share a little about your work and what's motivated you and brought you to the point where you are today.
well, it started nearly 50 years ago, so it's a long story, but the soundbite version would be that in 1973, I returned to Australia after 5 years in London, where I'd been a systems engineer for IBM working in the city of London, and came back to Australia with the aim of starting a Buddhist meditation centre and a community supporting that meditation centre. In 1977, that began with the meditation centre at the Channon between Byron Bay and Nimbin, and Bodhi Farm community, which was about a kilometre away. And we were just all young people in our 20s, building our own houses, delivering our own babies, growing food, and organising meditation retreats. When in August 1979, I got somehow sucked into what years later we realised was the first direct action in defence of rainforests. And at Terania Creek, a few kilometres from where we were living, I was somehow enlisted by the Earth in the defence of rainforests. Not quite sure how that happened, but it sucked me away from my life to that point and into the life that I've lived ever since in environmental activism, and then later in the philosophy of deep ecology. I realised at a certain point that there's no way that we're going to be able to save the planet one forest at a time, in spite of the successes that we'd had in Australia in the protection of rainforests in New South Wales, Tasmania, Queensland in the first half of the 1980s. Clearly, we were in the middle of the sixth mass extinction, and that without a revolution in consciousness, none of these actions were going to be sufficient. And that's what led me to deep ecology, and those somehow moving between environmental activism and deep ecology has been my life ever since.
Yeah, amazing. I've been to Terania Creek and I knew the story of Terania Creek when I went there. And so it was quite extraordinary to stand in that rainforest and know that it could have not been there were it not for a committed bunch of people. And so I'm really curious about what you think motivated you to make a stand for that one small piece of rainforest.
Initially, what motivated me was just that some neighbours appealed for help. I'd never visited the rainforest in question. I didn't know there was a rainforest there. I didn't know there were rainforests in Australia. I didn't know what a rainforest was. But I showed up for the neighbours and was smitten, so that it became clear that there was things undreamed of in my philosophy to that point. From then on, the motivation was that I had this experience of connection with the more than human world, which has guided my actions ever since. I feel none of the things that I've done were motivated or empowered from my personality, but that somehow that I hitched my wagon to that star and have been hanging on for dear life ever since, and just going wherever it dragged me.
I heard you once say something about that your actions for the rainforest and for the trees were like an immune response of nature herself coming through you. Can you say a little more about that?
Deep ecology says that the illusion of separation between human beings and the rest of the natural world is the fundamental mistake, and is the background to the environmental catastrophe that's taking place. And so when we understand that we are part of nature, that there can be no separation, we only have to hold our breath for 5 minutes to indelibly understand that there can be no separation, then it's like we humans become like one leaf on the tree of life, and the 10 million other species are similarly placed. And So, of course, when we remove the obstacles that are in the way of us experiencing that, of course, the intelligence of the planet, of which our puny human intelligence is just this tiniest of fragments, of course it can speak to us. Of course we can understand what's going on.
When I worked with Tree Sisters, we were doing quite a lot of work trying to connect people, like reconnect women in particular to nature. And one of the things that I noticed really strongly was that people who lived in cities and people who lived not in the presence of anything other than maybe a bit of grass or something or the odd tree really struggled with the concept of being a part of nature because it wasn't something they'd grown up with and it wasn't something that was familiar to them, and it definitely wasn't something that they'd ever sort of felt speaking to them or connecting with them. And I'm curious about, given that there are so many people around the world who live that way now, how do we make that reconnection when it's so alien almost for a lot of people?
Good question. I think that if people lose confidence in the ability of the dominant paradigm of the industrial growth society to give plausible answers to the questions that we're putting, then we begin to search around for something else. And the philosophy of deep ecology can give one an intellectual understanding of the fact that, I mean, we all, well, all educated people, I suppose, understand that every cell in my body is descended in an unbroken chain from the first cell of life on Earth, and therefore, logically, I am related to everything else that's alive. So that's kind of undeniable, although many deny it. But Arnie Ness, the professor of philosophy from Oslo University, who coined the term deep ecology, he said that ecological ideas won't save us, that what we need is ecological identity, ecological self. In other words, we're not going to be able to think our way out of the mess. We need a change in consciousness, change in identity, something fundamental. But the change in ideas, the idea that suddenly we might think, well, I know that I feel really disconnected, but I can see that this is an illusion. I can see that, in fact, I am connected by every breath of air I take, by every drop of water that I drink, by every morsel of food. The earth is cycling through me. It's just that I don't experience myself that way. Arnie Ness said that what we need are community therapies to heal that illusion. And that's what I've been working on since I met Joanna Macy in 1986 and began working with her on constructing these community therapies, experiential deep ecology workshops, what she now calls the work that reconnects. And so once people have the idea in their head that the way that I experience myself is incomplete, there's something missing, I can understand that intellectually, then they might sign up for a weekend to find out if it's true. And anybody that signs up for a weekend, dare I say, finds out that it is true, because this is who we actually are. This isn't something that has to be built or something that has to be manufactured. It's who we are. What Joanna said is that whatever sense of separation exists all comes from our side. The earth never pushed us away. That if there is a separation, it's coming from us. And she said that the moment that a group of people gathers together with the shared intention to dispel that illusion of separation, the earth comes rushing back in. And that's the experience that we have. So luckily, it's got nothing to do with the skill of the facilitator or the past experience of the people. Most of the people who come to this workshop for the first time are exactly as you point out. We live in the city and we are very, very far away from any experience of actually feeling our rootedness in the living earth. But strangely, it's very, very close. And the moment that we take the intention and we get together in community to explore that, it comes rushing back in and we have that experience.
And I think once you have that experience, it's physically undeniable, like it's physiologically impossible to ignore. Although I do find that my brain will try and say, oh, no, you imagined that. But the body knows, right? The body knows that it's a part of this enormous, complex living system. Where do you think that the concept of Gaia comes into that? Do you hold with that concept? I know it was James Lovelock's original sort of idea, but it's progressed in a number of different directions since then. Where are you with all of that?
I love that as at least as a metaphor. I find it like incredibly useful as a metaphor. And I'm agnostic, I suppose. I don't have enough data. I don't what can I say? Evidence is my religion. And I don't have enough evidence to understand yet how literally to take it. How about you?
Well, I think for me, personally, I prefer to go into the forest alone without groups of people, but I have done it with groups of people. But what I experience, I guess, out in nature is or with the water or with any element really of the living world, is a sense of a vast intelligence, I suppose. And humans do like to give names to things, so I guess Gaia is as good a word as any. And I suppose that also relates. I think what James Lovelock was doing was sort of referring back to a lot of the indigenous peoples who've referred to the earth as mother. So, but like you, I am also a bit agnostic because all of these things have been made up by people. Like humans have come up with these ideas and said, "This is, it's like this, it's like that." Yeah, so I just work off my own direct experience and what's taken place for me with little seeds planted by people who suggest things. So I'm not sure either, but I do feel that I am just a, a little speck in a vast system, but that at the same time, as a little speck, there's a way in which I can influence parts of the system. And I've done some of Joanna Macy's Work That Reconnects out in a remote area in New South Wales, which was quite amazing and also quite intense. I found it quite tiring, but transformational. I guess a lot of the people who come to this sort of work are people that already care. So they care about what's happening to the planet. They care about the future for their children. They may already care about the trees and so on. The kinds of people that come to your weekends, do they fit that format, or are they people who just somehow rolled up there without really knowing why?
Oh, no, they always fit that format because I deliberately am very, very transparent about this. And so anybody that looks at it and goes, wow, what woo woo, will stay away from it. And I wish there was a way to influence the people who need it the most more directly. But my experience is that it has to just grow gradually and it is growing gradually. I mean, it's not that long ago when there was a huge and enthusiastic demographic that were interested in this work, but they were all hippies and pagans and witches. And now it's like computer programmers and public servants, and there's the odd professor and even a senator from Victoria has come to the workshop. And so it feels like it's spreading, but it's spreading from people who are neighbours to each other. It can't jump out into, the chief executive at ExxonMobil as much as I'd like it to. It doesn't appear to work that way.
And I remember when James Lovelock's theory he was regarded as a crackpot, really. And now it's quite legitimate to talk about the Gaia theory. And I know there's quite a lot of science that's been exploring that theory. So then, what you're talking about, the way that the knowledge and the experiential part of it and the kind of remembering who we are filtering out through neighbours and what do you think that is? What is that? What's at work there?
I wrote an article, which I'd love you to put in the show notes, about deep ecology in relation to what's called the Bradley method. I don't know if you've run into it, but there were two sisters in Sydney, tree sisters in Sydney, by name of Bradley, who developed the method of inviting back the original nature of an area had after it's been trashed, whether it's by bushfires or by development or machinery, whatever it is. And what they found was that in order to do this, no heroic planting methods were required. What was needed was to be able to recognize both the native species and the exotic species, both in their mature form and the moment that a seedling appeared out of the ground. And the process consists of removing the exotics without treading on the natives. The reason that I bring it up in this context is that whatever the area that you're managing, the first impulse is to start by working in the most denuded, the most destroyed area, that huge erosion gully that's breaking your heart. But it doesn't work. What you have to do is find the strongest expression of native intelligence in the area that you're managing and work backwards from there, slowly stepping back. And what you find is that it might just be some annual weeds that have evaded the mower, but eventually they provide the microclimate that arouse the pioneer species of trees, and then they provide the microclimate that allows the the next stage in succession. And as you're backing out, it might be 7 years later, you suddenly discover that you've reached that erosion gully. And by the time that happens, the native vigor, the native intelligence is such that it just takes it in its stride. So human beings being a part of nature and not separate, I find that biological metaphors are more interesting and more useful than spaceship Earth or mechanical metaphors. And so I find the Bradley method to be a terrific metaphor of the way that changes in consciousness move through the society. And so, yes, it started with the hippies and pagans and witches, and now the more enlightened of the professors are coming to the party. That's just the way that things work.
I'd remember that I do know the Bradley method because somebody gave me, I think one of the sisters wrote a pamphlet and I've read it. And the thing that stuck with me was that you start where it's healthy. You start at the healthiest place. And that is a great metaphor. So do you believe that deep ecology is a form of spirituality?
Absolutely, without a doubt. One of my heroes is the cosmologist Brian Swim, colleague of the late Thomas Berry. He once said that he said the Earth used to be nothing but lava, and now it sings opera. You know, and so it's just like, well, when you are composed of that lava, nothing else was added from the outside, as far as I can see. There's no evidence of anything being added from, there's no old man with a white beard out there pointing his finger at it or anything like that. It's just in the nature of that lava to transform itself over time into an opera singer. Well, how could you deny the spirituality in that? I mean, what could be more spiritual than that? So it's like the viewing the universe story with sufficient as our own creation myth, with sufficient respect and awe and wonder. I think the spirituality, it's like human conceptions of spirituality are a very recent outgrowth from this ancient 13.7 billion years evolution of the cosmos, 4.5 billion years of the evolution of, organic life on Earth, a few million years of our ancestors stepping out of the forest and blinking onto the savannah to make our living on two legs. And what could be more spiritual than that story? So when that becomes my own story, who I am, rather than merely, just something in a biology textbook or something like that, then I think that the spirituality of it is very plain and obvious. What do you think?
Well, I guess it's plain and obvious to you and possibly to me, but I was raised my grandfather was a vicar in the Church of England, and my father trained to be a vicar, and so I've got quite a church background. And for me, the idea of spirituality was always, this far away off planet thing. It's not on Earth. And so it was kind of a revelation to me, particularly in my body, to experience what I experience when I'm with the water, or like I sing to the water. I've been doing it for about 10 years now. And remarkable things happen when you sing to the water, and trees love to be sung as well. And there's an experience that you have in your physical body that is very different to, I mean, I guess I've had some spiritual experiences inside churches, for example, but now I think that those experiences were based on the devotion that is within those built environments, and potentially the stone that those built environments are built with. And so I guess I understand why we have this kind of inbuilt notion that what's good is off planet, that we are these bad creatures, which is still kind of rippling through even in the ecological space, that humans are these terrible beings that are wrecking everything. And yeah, I don't like that concept because it's demonizing nature fundamentally. I guess I haven't really thought about, don't have that church-based spirituality, but it's in my cells from my upbringing, but I hadn't thought about exchanging it for an earth-based different story. Yeah, it's an interesting thing to contemplate.
Well, Thomas Berry, who was the person who inspired Brian Swim, that I quoted before, and he was perhaps the most famous progressive Catholic theologian of his time, which was the latter half of the last century. And he had this experience, which I think speaks to what you're talking about, where quite late in his life, he discovered that he was no longer a theologian, but had become a geologian, that his attention turned from the conception of God that he'd received in his upbringing in the Old Testament and the New Testament and so on. And he understood that all of these things, like everything else, grew out of the earth, that humans grew out of the earth, and all of the human ideas, including human ideas about spirituality, all of this grew out of the earth, and that correctly told, the story of the earth not only includes the ideas that he'd had all of his life, but that becomes just one creation myth of the 10,000 stories that humans have told to try to explain this incredible fact that anything exists at all, and who we are and where we've come from and so on. So there is no human society that doesn't have a story when the children ask those questions. And Thomas said that each of those stories is utterly gorgeous, is a beautiful blossom on the tree of life. But he said that the problem with those stories is that they tend to be at war with each other. It's not that I've got a story and you've got a story, but that I've got the true story and you are a heathen. So he said not just that Christian story is at war with the Muslim story, but that the Catholic is at war with the Protestant and the Sunni is at war with the Shia. And he said, it's too late for that now. We need a story that unites humans rather than separates them. And so he proposed that the story, as revealed by empiricism, by evidence, becomes our sacred story. But he said it has to be correctly told. We can't leave it to the scientists because they don't know anything about telling a good story or about having the kind of awe and humility and being just stunned into silence by the magnitude and the magnificence of what we find ourselves contemplating. For myself, it's hard for me to imagine that anybody experiences the world more spiritually through one of these tiny little stories as is possible from just taking the whole grand epic of evolution as the basis for our spirituality.
And I suppose now the new story is the story of modernity, where everything is virtual and nothing is true. No one believes anything, no one trusts anyone, and nothing is true, and everything is up for grabs somehow. And I wonder about how how do we move forward? So for me, I made a promise about 9 years ago after the second time I nearly died. I made this promise to dedicate whatever time I have left to seeing the earth thriving. And that promise has evolved over time from a kind of like, what can I do? What shall I do? Where shall I direct my attention? To something a lot more relaxed, where I kind of assume that through my being, my conscious beingness and the way that and what I love, that I am in service naturally in that way. But I'm also aware that I live very differently to most of the modern world. Given things are how they are, and people seem to be more switched off than ever before, and more diverted by the various hypnotic things that are around. Where should we be putting our attention as a species, given everything that's going on?
When Arnie Ness was asked for a definition of deep ecology, his answer was asking deeper questions. Perhaps a bit unsatisfying, but that's a good question. And I ask that question all the time myself. And I fishtail across the ice and answering it this way and that way, trying to find the most plausible way forward for myself that I can. I guess the answer that I have found is my work, the work that I do, which is, on the one hand, I was arrested again a few months ago, locked onto a harvesting machine in the Bulga State Forest, the heartland of the territory of the nationally endangered greater glider, as well as koalas and many other endangered species. And I stopped logging for a day. I did that again on the one hand. And on the other hand, it's clearly not enough. As important as that is, that alone is not going to do it. And so trying to spread the gospel, if I dare say, of deep ecology and of connectedness and of the fact that we have no independent existence. What happens to the earth happens to us. We humans seem to be capable of sacrificing our lives for one social fiction after another, whether it's religion or whether it's a country or whatever it is. And yet when the earth, which is the source of everything, including all of the social fictions that people believe in and identify with, when that is threatened, it's a big deal for someone to lock themselves to a machine and sacrifice a day or two of their lives and a few $100s in court costs. It's ridiculous. It's because we don't understand who we are. We may understand it intellectually, but it hasn't kind of sunk in. And so doing whatever I can to help that sink in to as many people as I can reach is the other part. So given more than 8 billion people in the world and that 35 people is the most that I can handle for a weekend of deep ecology, which I'm doing again this coming weekend at the Narara Eco Village where I live, and which I did twice in Melbourne in the last month. And, there's only so much that I can do. It seems utterly implausible to think that I could possibly make any difference. But I feel like I've just surrendered to, let's call it Gaia. I've surrendered to the vast intelligence out of which my tiny intelligence emerged. And I feel like because I have surrendered to that, I feel like I can receive direction and vision and empowerment from that. And that's what it's telling me to do. I guess to a lot of people, that's just going to sound like, oh, God, he's up himself, isn't he? And there's nothing I can do about that. But on the other hand, to me, it's the only game in town. I can't see anything else that's even remotely distracting. Like, given the rate at which the world is disappearing down the tubes, who could be bothered with fame or wealth or any of those things that all seem so hollow and ridiculous compared to, and given that I am made of the same material as that lava that can now sing opera, and that there's something so miraculous about the whole story about how it moved from lava to what we see around us at the moment, that it'd be foolish to think that something very, very unusual and unexpected might yet come hurtling out of the cosmos to move things in a direction that no one can possibly imagine at the moment. And so I find that my own life is incredibly rewarded by the work that I do. And it seems amazing to me that someone could be as uplifted as I feel under the circumstances. And it's not because I'm in denial about everything that's happening out there. I'm totally nonplussed and bewildered, and I can't imagine any way that we can possibly save this now. And nonetheless, I find myself hurling myself into it as if you could. So go figure.
There's so much to speak to in there. Like, I want to ask you how important you feel direct action is, because I always have so much admiration for direct action. I did some when I was a young person, and then I ended up having 4 children, and I just couldn't do it because I had to keep a household going. And now I'm still raising my last child, my 4th son. So there's that question, but there's also, when I'm listening to you speaking, what I'm hearing is what you said before about surrendering to, whatever you might call Gaia or the intelligence of life, and trusting that the actions that you are moved to take are beneficial, worth taking, and that through that process you are rewarded. I guess that makes me reflect on, when I follow what I'm kind of drawn to do by my own physiology, which for me is to go and sing to the water or go in the forest and sing to the trees, which also sounds like ridiculous hippie woo woo. There's no mistaking the response that comes back from those elements of the living world, which then makes me want to do it more, even though when I talk about it, I might sound ridiculous. I guess where I land with all of that is that every single one of us has this piece, because we are all just a little tiny piece. We've all got this piece, which is a contribution to that intelligence that now sings opera and makes AI and uh, has got plotting to live on Mars. How do you think people can access the piece that they're carrying, the intelligence of the planet that they're carrying within them, that is their contribution to the living whole, which may be buried under layers of social fictions, responsibilities, stressors, everything else? How do you think people can get to that?
Well, I only have my tiny piece. And so, given that, the answer from this tiny piece is the work that I do. So I'm not trying to say that this is the whole answer or anything, but that this is the piece of the answer that I've been given. And what I've learned is that the experiential deep ecology workshops, Work That Reconnects, turns out to be synchronous with the ceremonies and rituals that all Indigenous societies practice in order to prevent the human from drifting away into merely social identity, merely social conceptions of who we are, and of regularly getting together, the whole community in a circle, to remember all our relations, to remember our rootedness in the living earth, and to give thanks and praise to all of that. So when we experience through that we are rooted in the living earth, that there is no separation possible, then we also experience that vision and empowerment and direction and instructions come through that. And it's, at the beginning, it felt preposterous, and it felt like that I must have a mental illness, because I didn't have any conceptual framework that would allow for such a thing. I didn't believe in things like that. But it was so warm and so utterly undeniable that I surrendered. Now, that doesn't mean that I don't get lost again and again and again, because I do, and that's why Indigenous people do these things again and again and again, is because we get lost over and over. And so we need to have cultural forms that allow us to regularly return to this kind of an understanding. So when I get lost now, the process that I like to use is one where one of the processes that we'll be doing at the Narara Eco Village next Sunday is a process where we share our gases consciously with the green world. We stand, and with each exhalation, we remember that in spite of the bad rap that CO2 has these days, for a good reason, in fact, it has a very honourable history, and that our ancestors more than 2 billion years ago, when everything alive was a single-celled bacteria swimming in the ocean, somehow invented photosynthesis and were able thereafter to capture photons of light from the sun and use the energy of the sun to extract carbon from CO2 and use it to build our bodies, use that carbon. However, an unintended byproduct of that was a molecule of oxygen that was released, which was a toxic poison to the anaerobic life of that time. For nearly 1 billion years, that oxygen couldn't wreak any havoc because there was so much iron dissolved in the oceans that the moment the oxygen was released, it oxidized and some iron, and one molecule of ferrous oxide or rust fell to the bottom of the ocean. And all of the iron that we mine today, that's how it accumulated. It accumulated over 1 billion years as a result of single-celled organisms, ancestors of yours and mine, extracting photons from the sun and using them to build our bodies. But eventually the oxygen piled up and threatening all of life. And then the next miracle was the heme molecule, the ancestor of the hemoglobin protein that transports oxygen to all animal bodies, including yours and mine. And that cycle of partnership between those that inhale CO2 and those that inhale oxygen has been present ever since then. And so when we add consciousness to that exchange and allow ourselves to feel gratitude for the oxygen and allow ourselves to feel abundant and generous as we exhale and we just exchange gases consciously, I find that that is very, very useful for remembering who I really am and for finding my direction when I'm feeling lost and bewildered and not sure what to do. So there are lots and lots of things like that. I don't know how plausible it sounds to people listening to this, but all I can say is try it out.
That's a beautifully simple thing to do as well. It's not complex. It doesn't require a story, really. It's just a very simple action that we're doing anyway. I have one more curiosity, which is in the circles that I move in, there's a lot of fix-it mentality going on around the planet with lots of high-tech fixes for what people regard as problems. And a lot of those high-tech fixes have some very negative impacts, I guess you could say, or they just cancel each other out, or, you know, they're not really adding anything, but obviously there's a lot of profit in it for somebody. I think the mentality of being a part of a massive natural intelligence is a little different to the mentality of like, we've got a problem, quick, fix it any way we can. So, and I think that's where humanity is sort of caught up on right now, and having all these large discussions like the COPs and all these big conversations that seemingly don't really lead to anything, or they lead to more commodification of nature or more invention of more crazy systems. What's your view on how we get out of that "we've got a problem and we've got to fix it" mindset that kind of leads to not very good higher thinking?
I guess I'm realizing that I've only got one answer to every question that you ask, and that it's like I've been given one instrument in this vast symphony, or, you know, like I'm not trying to say that I've got the whole answer or anything, but it's the only answer that I've been given. And so my answer is that um, I don't know anything that to do about the how to say convincing the people who believe that there's a technological fix to all of this, but it doesn't ring true to me. And the only piece that I've been given is to try to show people the way that I've been shown to find out directly from the earth, from the living earth, from the universe, to get your own instructions. And people who do that, it doesn't seem like the instruction is more technology. That doesn't seem to be what's coming through. If that was what was coming through, I would be all for it. You know, it's not like I know what the answer is. I just know where to find it on a day-to-day, week-to-week, year-to-year. You know, I feel like I'm getting my inspiration from the source. I guess that's what Christians feel. That's what Muslims, you know. So of course I may be wrong, but I I don't know how else to answer the question.
If it's not technological solutions, what kinds of things do come through for people?
Oh, well, for me, it's deep ecology, which is that if we can understand that the sense of separation that we feel from the living earth is an illusion, and thereby we become open to the possibility of letting go of that illusion and finding our way back again, then we too can receive our instructions in the way that singing to the water, or, you know, whatever it is. Like, I've never sung to the water, but maybe I'll start now. That sounds great. Maybe you haven't exchanged gases consciously, but you know. So let's just create the conditions where people can receive their inspiration or instructions. Where, you see, it's like the human is one cell in the vast body of life on Earth, that there are 10 million species living in exquisite, evolving, complex, dynamic relationship with each other. We're just the tiniest speck of this. So when we let go of the idea that the human being is at the center of all of this, that's at the peak of the pyramid, everything else is just a resource. When we let go of this and we just allow ourselves to feel the humility of just this tiny thing, then it's like, in the same way as in the growing embryo, one cell is all made out of the same DNA, but one cell suddenly finds itself migrating in a certain direction because it's going to become part of the brain, and another cell moves in another direction because it's going to be part of the liver. And it's not like those cells are saying, "Oh, you know, brains are good," or, you know, "I'm going to be this." It's just that they're surrendered. They don't have any reason not to go where life sends them. So we humans are no different than anything else, except in as much as we push it away, except in as much as we make ourselves different. So if we can surrender to that, why wouldn't the intelligence of the earth direct us to the place where we would be the most useful, in the same way as that cell is being directed towards being a fingernail or whatever piece it is. So I think part of it is just letting go of having too many opinions or too many priorities or too many agendas, and kind of learning how to just say, "I'll go wherever you send me. I don't care. I don't care what it is. I don't care what I do. I don't know. I don't know what I should be doing. So show me."
I love that. It's also such a blessed relief as well to not have to be responsible for fixing everything. Is there anything else that you feel to share before we wrap up?
Just one thing, that a point that you made earlier on that I would like to return to, where you were saying that one of the places that we've ended up is seeing the human as being the scourge, that we are the cancer that is destroying the earth and so on. So I just feel that something that I feel the need to address is that that too is just as anthropocentric as thinking that we are the crown of creation and the measure of all being and the source of all value and all of those things. That if, as I believe, we are just one tiny cell in the giant body of the earth, just one tiny leaf on the tree of life, then we're part of the earth, and what we're doing, the earth is doing that. That if we are killing the Cenozoic era, if we are wiping the slate of hundreds of millions or billions of years of evolution, then actually the earth does that from time to time. That 232 million years ago, at the end of the Permian, a vast mass extinction, I think the fourth mass extinction, more than 90% of all of the species of life at that time vanished as a result. It's controversial what caused that to happen, but the fact that when you dig down, wherever you dig in the earth, when you reach that layer, that's what you find, is that this vast whole families of species like the trilobites disappeared at that time. And so whatever caused that, it doesn't matter what caused it. It's part of the whole story. And so if humans are causing this extinction, for us to see ourselves as being outsiders is to be making the same anthropocentric error. I'm not sure what's supposed to happen next, of course, but whatever it is, I think that if it should be that humans are going to be given the dispensation to somehow have this radical shift in consciousness where we return to being grateful to be alive and part of this magnificence as a species, if we can come to this somehow, then a little compassion for ourselves is going to be a useful part of that. And so letting go of hatred for humans, letting go of misanthropy, and just seeing that we're innocent in a certain kind of a way. We didn't choose to be like this. We didn't write this script. We might think we wrote it. We didn't. We just evolved. If I had written the script, I would make us more closely related to bonobos and less closely related to chimps, but I didn't write it, and this is just how it turned out. And so if we can forgive ourselves, if we can love ourselves in spite of everything that's going on, I think that would increase our chances of finding a solution which includes us, because the Earth itself is going to continue, no doubt about that. Whether humans continue remains in question. Whether mammals continue, we don't know how far back along the tree the branch is going to get stripped if the slide to oblivion is allowed to continue. But whatever it is, it's like the detritus that we leave behind us, all the microplastics, all the radioactivity, whatever it is, bacteria will evolve so that becomes their resource. That becomes the resource for whatever the future of evolution is. There was a Council of All Beings, one of the deep ecology workshops, the processes, the first one that Joanna and I put together in 1986 when we met, and where we allowed the voices of non-humans to speak through us. Long story, but I just remember a time when there was 2 cockroaches that showed up at the Council of All Beings, and there was a human there who was saying, "Oh, we're not bad. We're just like adolescents. Just give us a chance. We're gonna." And the cockroaches were like, "No, get out of here. It's our turn." So there's something waiting in the wings. Everything becomes extinct. Nothing lives forever. Humans will become extinct. The question is it going to be like the year after next, or could we have another 100 million years or so? I vote for the latter. I've got nothing better to do with my life. I love it here. I think this is great. I want it to go on. But if it should be that we're witnessing the end of human life, well, I just think that it'd be better to go out with a smile of gratitude on our face and going, wow, wasn't that incredible?
Thank you. Thank you. That's a great way to wrap up. I'm curious about where you usually run your workshops and how often a person could participate in a deep ecology workshop.
That remains to be seen, but I have been doing them the last year or two near Sydney at the Narara Eco Village and near Melbourne, and probably what's going to continue. But anybody that just looks up John C. Deep Ecology will find my schedule. And
amazing. Thank you so much, John.
Oh, thank you. I've been doing a lot of podcasts lately, and I've so enjoyed talking to you. You just really feel like a kindred spirit.
Thank you. Yeah, likewise. Yeah.
The book Thinking Like a Mountain, which I wrote with Joanna Macy and Arnie Nest and Pat Fleming in 1988. I'm turning it into an audio book at the moment, and it's been translated into a dozen languages and so on, that it's available as a PDF. And that PDF, the link to that PDF will be in the show notes so people can look at it if they wish. And that it's a kind of a recipe book for doing the experiential deep ecology work. Lots of people have tried the recipes without having actually participated in a workshop themselves, and they report that it works just as well, that you don't even need to have participated once in order to make use of the processes that we offer there.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you so much.